Funeral Service of the Unknown Australian Soldier is, a landmark speech in Australian history, and it's a really good example of a persuasive speech. Paul Keating decided, he was the Prime Minister of Australia, and he decided on the 75th anniversary of the armistice from World War One that instead of letting the Governor-General deliver the speech, what he did was he delivered this speech. And the purpose was to obviously commemorate and inter the unknown Australian soldier who was recovered from the Western Front and returned to Australia, and the soldier was being interned into the Australian War Memorial, and it was done on the 11th of November in 1993. Very significant day, a Remembrance Day, the day we stop and remember those soldiers and army personnel, both males and females, who have sacrificed themselves in defence of our country. So Paul Keating took this speech because he wanted to use it, one, to commemorate the occasion, of course, but also to really shape the Australian identity. He wanted to use it as a means of continuing that conversation, that ongoing discourse about who we are as a nation, where we've come for, and what we stand for and what we believe in today. So if we talk about some of the ways in which he does that, we'll run through those and then we'll come back to this idea of identity at the end. So he talks in the, he uses inclusivity, and I've got second person there, but it's actually first person, isn't it? We do not know. So he rather than speaking for himself, he speaks for everyone there that are in the immediate audience and those obviously other people who listen to the speech externally or even later. We all of us who identify as Australians connect with this because he's used the term we, the inclusive we, rather than I. And that's a very purposeful decision he's made to do that. And, it is then becomes a shared experience, and the values that he espouses, the things he talks about, we all value together. And what he does in the opening of the speech is he focuses on what we don't know. He uses binary oppositions here. So here he's saying we don't know who the soldier is and where he was born. And then he uses that as a means of saying, well, this is what we do know, and that this one soldier represents one of the 416,000 Australians who volunteered for service during the First World War. So he tells us all of this sort of information, and he uses this binary opposition or contrast, if you like, throughout the speech. So the speech is about death, but it's also about life. And there is a paradox that he's saying that out of the death of this soldier, the sacrifice that has occurred, comes new life and new hope, and presents us with a position of being free today. And it stresses that the people who came before us created the world that we have today. So they provided our freedom. So it's interesting, isn't it, that in order to understand who we are currently and what we believe in, and we have to look backwards and see where we've come from. Now the speech is highly emotive as well, and here's a good example of it, because the Great War was a mad, brutal, awful struggle, and sets up this idea. It was distinguished more often than not by military and political incompetence. So here it's referring to the conflict, I suppose, between the Australian soldiers and the British command, and showing that there was the incompetence was on Britain's side of the story, and that when we look at our experience in Gallipoli, it was from the battle wasn't lost because of the Australian soldiers' efforts and bravery and skillful ability. It was the bad decisions by the British Army to land there and to continue with the war. So the speech is highly emotive, and it appeals to pathos, which increases the scale of sacrifice that has led to our lives of freedom today. So we, all these people, all these soldiers and nurses and all sorts of personnel went through this horrific experience so that we could have a better life today. That they wanted to ensure that the future of Australia was one that was free, and it really reflected what they believed in. So the speech, when we look at that, it's a very inspirational. The efforts that have occurred and the sacrifice that was made, and what Keating then does is he talks about the notion of heroism, and he says that it was a lesson about ordinary people, and the lesson was that they were not ordinary. So this recognises that it's the everyday Australian who makes Australia great. So, it's not about significant world leaders or politicians, but it's the contributions that we all make, just the ordinary people, the contributions we make, the values that we share that makes Australia such a great society. And Keating cleverly transfers ownership of his ideas onto the audience. And this is the real feat of this speech. He doesn't impose his beliefs on them. Instead, he gets them to believe what he believes. So this is the skillful use of rhetoric. He uses rhetoric to persuade his audience to own the ideas that he presents. One of the big ideas that he presents is this idea about the unknown soldier. And so he uses symbolism. And he says that the unknown Australian soldier embodies the personal characteristics of all Australians. So he talks about bravery and courage, that they're inventive and that they're supportive and that we're prepared to sacrifice things, what we've lost in war and what we've gained. So out of the struggles and the sacrifices have come really positive things, such as the democracy in which we live in today. So everyone has that opportunity. So the speech reinforces the positives of the Australian identity, and that ultimately the speech is about identity and explores who we are as a nation and where we've come from. And so this really works well with the text that we've explored, and so we can look at it on two levels. We can look at how the speech is really reinforcing once again how fiction allows us to explore and continue that discourse about the Australian identity, who we are and what we value, what we believe. It certainly does that. The other thing that the speech does is it shows us the way in which you can, very purposefully craft language to achieve an end, and that's a real feat as well.